Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Pond, awards editor of TheWrap, and we're happy to have you here for our awards screening of Belfast with director Kenneth Branagh and actor Ciarán Hinds. We're going to start by showing you the trailer to the film, and then we'll go right into a conversation with our guests. To the audience, please participate in the live chat, share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from. And now let's take a look at the trailer to Belfast.
We all have a story to tell. But what makes each one different is not how the story ends, but rather the place where it begins. Holy God.
Mama says if we went across the water, they wouldn't understand the way we talk.
If they can't understand you, then they're not listening. You know who you are, don't you? Your buddy from Belfast, where everybody knows you.
Hey, buddy! Your mom's calling you, yes!
We're looking to cleanse the community a wee bit.
You wouldn't want to be the old man out in the street. Touch my family and I'll kill you.
Are we gonna have to leave Belfast?
We'll fight this together.
This is it? This is what?
This is war.
We're living in a civil war.
What do you want?
I want my family with me. I want you. Kids the same age as ours are getting killed. We can give these boys a better chance than we ever had.
I know nothing else but Belfast.
Go now. Don't look back.
Welcome back. It's my pleasure to introduce writer and director Kenneth Branagh and actor Ciarán Hinds. Welcome, gentlemen, and congratulations to both of you on, a beautiful film and on all your Oscar nominations.
Thanks very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
And Ken, I should add congratulations to you because you have now been nominated in 7 different categories at the Oscars, which moves you past Walt Disney, George Clooney, and Alfonso Cuarón as the person who's been nominated in the most categories.
No one more surprised or amazed than I, Steve, to be honest. It's definitely not, yes, we're not what you joined for, but amazing to me. And I suppose what it makes me feel so grateful for is the number of ways in which I've, circled the storytelling process, basically, across these 30 odd years of making films, that you get a chance to be trying to attack the story from all these different kind of positions. So amazing that the recognition should come, but as I say, no one more surprised than I am, but it's a lovely thing. So I'm very grateful to be
right. I remember a few years ago we had you on a panel of songwriters who had songs in the Oscar competition with Elvis Costello and Diane Warren, and you had written the lyrics to a song from one of your movies. So it's just too bad you couldn't have talked Van Morrison into letting you.
No one's gonna be writing the lyrics for Van's songs. I can tell you that, except Van. So he was definitely somebody who we step back and say, sir, if you are interested, if you have anything to respond to musically to our film, we would be most grateful. And thank God he did.
Yeah. Right. So Ciarán, what has this experience been like for you so far? I mean, you've been doing, extraordinary work for quite a while, but this is your first trip through this part of the circus.
Yeah, and I guess circus is a good word. It's kind of extraordinary to me. I mean, basically, when everything always starts with a screenplay, etc., and Ken had written the most beautiful one, and then he visualized.
visualize the story beautifully. And what was great for us all was we understood that this film, this personal boyhood story, was touching so many people. It was really, really getting into them, and that in itself was a kind of a huge reward and deeply gratifying. And then all this that has come afterwards with more support from the industry and people pushing the film to be rewarded in many ways is quite revelatory to me. Never having sort of gone in this direction. Of course, Ken has been here many times before. He's an old hand at it, I guess, and sort of he's kind of guiding me a little bit in not to let myself down too much. Basically, as I plow on willy-nilly through these extraordinary this, I don't know, the circumstances are extraordinary for me being here, but it's very pleasant, and you also get to meet some fantastic people along the way.
Yeah. Right. So let's talk about the genesis of this. I mean, the film is about a very specific time. I mean, I think it's the opening thing says August 15th, 1969, which I believe was the first day of Woodstock. But this is something that happened, far away from that. I mean, Ken, can you talk a little about what the inspiration was for writing this?
Well, you're right. It was the first day of Woodstock, Steve. And I suppose and that reminds me that we were just about aware. I was aware as a 9-year-old, capturing what I could or half hear about news announcements on the radio or on the television, that there'd been quite a bit of kerfufflage in the north of Ireland in the previous couple of years, that the civil rights movement was happening, that in Paris in 1968 there had been all these student riots, that there was, with the music explosion and the sort of summer of love in San Francisco, that there was a sense that the world was on the sizzle, that there was a sort of social revolution happening. I couldn't have put it in those terms, but I just knew that, as my mother used to put it when things got a bit out of hand, she'd say, "I don't know what it is, but it just feels like go, go, go." And the world at that time was all go, go, go. And it certainly was in our part of Belfast. And what happened, I think, I never really got over, which was to be uprooted fairly savagely, along with everybody else in that part of the world, from whatever their previous way of life had been, into one where we were on a sort of code red, high alert for a life changed by the conflict that began to be expressed very explicitly between the Catholic and Protestant population, at least in its extreme elements. And into that mix came the British military, and this awful period, this dark and tragic period of the Troubles began. It meant, in our case, eventually that we would leave Belfast. And in so doing, I think many hearts in our family were broken, even though we knew that the decision made, for what it was worth, was that the economic security of a job for my father, the relative safety, it would seem, of the two young, impressionable, perhaps vulnerable kids was something that took priority over what we definitely were identified by, which was being part of a community that we knew, that we loved, that we previously lived harmoniously within, in a big, large, extended family that was full of aunts and uncles and cousins, and I would say security and peace. And we went from that world into a world of chaos, and eventually away from the place that we knew and we loved. And that sense of the abrupt and uncomfortable leaving of Belfast came swimming back to occupy my mind and spirit during the early part of the lockdown, where an uncertainty and an unpredictability about where all of our lives were going in an unvaccinated world, and it's suddenly, after 50 years, couldn't not be written. It had to come out.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, you talk about the feeling of leaving where you grew up. I just feel like, the toll that leaving took is so beautifully summed up in one look and one line from Judi Dench at the end of this movie. You just feel it all.
Well, there is something under the skin. I think Ciarán conveys it beautifully in sometimes in a couple of looks to young Jude, when there he is asking about the future or asking about things which, you know, are a young person's request for certainty from the universe. There's a great look Ciarán does in the scene where the boy says what he'd like to have when he grows up and what's going to happen, because he thinks his dad wants him to leave Belfast. And it's a beautiful bit of acting, because he sort of behind the eyes steps forward to maybe say something, and then he doesn't. He just retreats again. And I feel like in that moment, it's somebody, an older person saying, I could tell you what life's going to, oh, you know what? I won't tell you what life's going to be like, because it doesn't matter what I tell you, you're going to have to feel it. And you know that he would like to do it for the kid. He'd take the bullet for the kid, but you can't. You know, that's another thing about loss and leaving things that you're going to have to learn. And that humane fabric inside the film was all provided by actors like Ciarán, but it's really what thanks to them, it's what the sort of gravitational weight of the film became.
Right. Ciarán, do you remember that moment?
I do. The scenes that were very intimate, Ken had given us sort of access to the little home we had, the space we had, and he gave us the time and the space to deeply connect with each other, to really listen to each other, and therefore it wasn't about like, what are we going to accomplish, what are we striving for to get to the end of the scene. Well, let's just listen to each other honestly, and that's complicated sometimes, you know, with the dialogue and where to come in and the rhythm of the structure of the scene, and yet see where we end up. See where we honestly end up, and so that it's as pure as you're striving to get it. And then working with Jude, one couldn't say incomparable. He's only 10, but he is extraordinary. And with such when you see somebody with that excitement and that innocence and that natural beauty and intelligence and intuition, he really puts you in a position where you better come up to the mark, because the honesty of what he's doing is extraordinary and it reflects. So the least you can do is pay attention and get the lines right, and just connect with him. And he was and with Judy too, Judi Dench, the great Jane Judy. I mean, that was just the threesome, the scenes we did between the three of us. I wouldn't say we lost the run of ourselves, but we just went somewhere. We went somewhere into another place, and Ken seemed to be able to pick it up on the camera beautifully. And it was what he was saying, for instance, about the idea of a man who wants to help, who wants to pass on what he knows, give the advice to a kid, and then realizes his shoulders are far too little at the moment. Mm-hmm. And he's going to have to go through it himself. But like when you come to in the end scene, the hospital scene, where he does give him that advice about knowing who he is. As long as you know who you are and where you come from, exactly. And I was going to say, a beautiful piece of writing. Ken hasn't written, you're from Belfast. He says, you're from Belfast 15. You know, he's given a postal district. He's located specifically in North Belfast. And it was such beautiful writing that when you offer that up to Jude, to Buddy, and his face is just connected into it, you can see him taking it all on board. And that was kind of when you go into a place and you're being truly creative, that Ken permitted us to do.
One of the bits of magic I would say, though, that, you know, prompted the capacity for Ciarán and Judy to do all that beautiful listening with that, as Ciarán says, that very natural boy, was the day, so I guess it was the Thursday or the Friday before Ciarán started properly on a Monday, and I did this with the other actors. I said, do you mind, look, I'd like to do a test. If you don't mind putting the clothes on and the makeup and everything, look, we've got this outside of this house here, not much of it. We built the outside of it. So I'm going to put the camera on a track here, and I'm just going to track past as if the camera was somebody walking down the street. And you're at the front door like my granddad used to be, and like you'd know other people are going to be. And as we do that, this was not it's scripted. I said, as we do that, I'll just walk along by the camera and maybe I'll throw a few things your way. And this was the beginning of, so the clothes were on, no scenes had been done, but every actor, including Ciarán, particularly here, were able, as soon as they, beyond thinking, what the bloody hell's he doing, realized there could be some value to it, i.e. you're tasting the part for the first time. Suddenly he's going, wait, and there's a bit of a wave to the person walking down the street. How you doing? Not doing, not so bad, whatever. And it was a very fascinating thing to see, just even in a few seconds, the role start to sort of fill from the inside out in this, no pressure scenario. And as it happened, that didn't end up in the final movie, but it was in a cut for a long time, one of those moments, because it was so real, it was so natural, and also it was part of all of these actors sort of jumping in and allowing stuff to happen, not feeling, in the same way as you might with the kid, where you've got to be on your mettle, but you can't prepare too much, you can't, because he's going to do something unusual. So it's not like I've got my lovely bathroom mirror performance ready. I was great last night when I practiced it for the last time, and I shall come and repeat it. I won't recreate it, I'll just repeat it. That finds you out in these kind of things. So the very first moment of just going, do you fancy just making some of this stuff up, was the beginnings of, I suppose, a trust between us all, that we could find some stuff that way, and we wouldn't stitch the actors up, but it would be part of this goal of making it truly, truly, truly seem like it was happening before our very eyes.
Right. Yeah. So, Ciarán, you're a little older than Ken is. What do you remember? And I think you lived in a different area in Belfast. What do you remember of August 1969, the beginning?
We were only about a mile away, if that, from each other. We were both North Belfast boys, Limestone Road, Antrim Road, North Belfast. And what was interesting was the Capitol Cinema we were equidistant from the Capitol Cinema, the only cinema in North Belfast. Well, there might have been one up the Old Park Road, I'm not sure, but we were equidistant from it. We never met, of course. We went to different schools. 1969, August. As in every year, our family went to Cushendall in County Antrim for our summer holidays. And we were there when, on the 15th of August. And my father's a doctor. He usually came to join us for the last week. He would work through the 3 weeks of August, join us for the last week. And we didn't have television down there or anything like that. So it was only like 60 miles away, but it was still very away from what was going on. And father got in touch through, I think he phoned a golf club, who then she phoned back and did all that. And he said, "Now, I'm not going to come down. I might be needed here in Belfast for the moment. And you're not to worry. It'll be fine. But don't think about coming back. Just see the month of August out." And then we came back. And indeed, when we came back at the end of the month, and I went back to school, to the Catholic grammar school I was at, there was the feeling of coming back. There was just something in the air. There was a kind of, it had calmed down for a bit after the initial burst, but it was still, the residue was all around. And there was a sense of, not malevolence, but some kind of a dark cloud over the city, which was then going to carry on later on in fits and spurts, and then grow into a very troubling time for us all. That's what I remember.
One thing that I remember, Ciarán, might interest you, Steve, you might be interested in this, is that when I did research for those specific times, I went and we found the program for the Capitol Cinema across that period through 69 and 70. And one thing that amazed me, we also found the proof that A Christmas Carol, the play that they go and see in the film, was on December 1969 at the Grove Theatre on the Shore Road, starring Joseph Tumulty as the Ghost of Marley. But in the Capitol Cinema, I didn't remember this, but they would show like 12 movies a week. They would change their program almost daily, so that the range of no wonder we went a lot, because the range of pictures was amazing, and it would always be double features. It wouldn't be just one. You'd have 3 terrific movies, and so there might be 20 available to see that week, and they'd be old and new, and it was really, that's why it was such a sort of palace of bloody delights, that weird, pretty flea-bitten cinema as I recall, but it had all the big pictures.
Yeah. So as you starting to write about that era and what happened, was going to the movies together always a central part of that, because there's such wonderful scenes in the film?
For us, it was because it was such a ritual. With my dad away a lot, it was one of the times when we were genuinely together. And although you could say we would, why weren't we out playing in the park? We did a bit of that as well. But there was being united by going to the cinema in Royal Avenue in the centre of town. It was a big place. I was a tiny boy, so it seemed huge. I don't think we had popcorn back then, but you had lemonade. I think you could have lemonade or an orange juice or something. And that ritual was just fantastic. And it couldn't be further away. The color, the size, the kinds of the stories. I mean, I realized after a while when I was putting together the films that we might conclude excerpts of. One of them that didn't make it in but was in for a long time was The Great Escape. Another one that made it in for a while but not in the end was The Sound of Music. And I realized after a while that all of the movies that really stamped themselves in my head were all escape movies. They were all movies about getting away. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which is in the movie, is about flying car goes to a magical land where magic is possible. Sound of Music has the Von Trapps leaving, across the Alps. Great Escape has, Steve McQueen trying to get off on a motorbike across the Austrian border, etc. But the fantastical natures of those stories and the intensity of the color, when the Belfast that I was looking at, as reflected in this film, was a fantastic and magnificent monotone. It was grey and it was often very rainy. So the ritual of the cinema was vitally important to us.
Mm-hmm. Right. Ciarán, was it important for you and your family?
Not as much as Ken's family, that's for sure. I used to go on my own sometimes. There might be the occasional treat where we would go en masse, the family. But most of my sisters, as I remember, at that age, they would have all been down at convent school. They would have been boarders. Down in the wilds of County Down. So I was kind of the only one left at home for a while. So I would go on my own sometimes, I remember. My father was a great man for the Westerns, like a lot of men of that generation, Belfast men. They just adored Westerns and the American, whether they were television shows or cinema, but he was more of a television man than a cinema man. And but I have a memory of when the girls got out of boarding school that Mum would put on her finery and we'd all be trooped off to watch things like The Sound of Music and all like that. And me thinking, well, it's not really the action-packed war film that I thought I was going to see. It's a musical with a lot of little girls singing, but it was fantastic at the same time.
So, Ken, when you're envisioning this film, obviously it's based on you and your family. Do you have to work to separate the characters from just being, versions of yourself and your family?
I had a fairly strong instinct that as soon as they were out of my head, that they would start to expand and become something that was in the mind of the 9-year-old through whose view we were going to see the events of this story, that they became expanded or imaginatively changed, that the story and his account of it didn't need to be, didn't want to be, didn't deserve to be really any attempt at a sort of documentary truth. Instead, it was what they made him feel, what the passion between them made him feel, and what the mysteries of that incredible workroom out the back that is pop occupied, that seemed to have every piece of wire and bottle and metal work and everything known to man. It was what were the grenades that they set off in the boy's imagination when crockery flew across that kitchen as it did, when passionate arguments were had, or when they danced, or when these ad hoc parties happened in the street. I think a vivid imagination was already at work then, somebody who enjoyed dancing with the stories. And so I let myself have the license to do that as it went down on the page. And I very much invited the actors to own the roles and worry less necessarily about asking me documentary questions about the individuals involved, but more about their own experience of that time, of those kinds of people, or just how psychologically things spoke to them. So the goal was, in a way, was as quickly as possible to get away from me and try and find the things, and the actors' contributions were going to be the beginning of this, that were universal in the way they connected with other families, other cultures, trying to find a way for this story to be available to way more people than me and my therapist.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Ciarán, for you, did you have those documentary questions about Ken's grandfather, or?
No, I didn't, and Ken never offered them up to me either. But the point was that when I was reading the script, I was brought back to my own roots, to my own people, to my own grandparents, my parents, because the authenticity of the writing and the scenarios that Ken had set up were not a million miles away from my own. And the descriptions of the streets and all and everything, the parks they played, I understood it all because I had been there. I had been part of that. It just happened to be a very long time ago. And so when it's like great storytelling, when people you immerse yourself in a story and then you're taken into a place. And in my place, I wasn't taken to a place. I was taken back to a place that I had in a way disremembered, but not fully, but had gone back to the back of my mind. And reading Ken's script put it bang right in the front, very vividly. And what I love was the truth of it. And it was lovely because it was heightened as well. But then some of our lives are naturally heightened anyway. And the crack and the fun of Belfast people and how they speak and how they wind each other up and how they slag each other off. But with a deep love and a deep connection to each other, that they're solid and sound and stoical people from the north of Ireland. And if they can, they will help. There is the other thing that we had the political side to it and the distrust between two tribes, if you like. But at the heart, those tribes, when they're not there, as Ken grew up in a street, Protestants and Catholic living together, very, very closely, very warmly. Nobody left out. Nobody held out. What happens is extremists of one side come in, the extreme come in, and they provoke, and then all hell lets loose. And Ken had created the truth of that very beautifully and very truthfully.
Mm-hmm. Right. So when the film creates such a wonderful sense of this family, Ken, I mean, what did you do to help create that? I mean, amongst the actors. I mean, my understanding is there was sort of a time at the beginning when everybody got together and talked about their own families.
Yes, and then we did things like, for instance, Judi Dench's eyes are not great for reading. And so in order to understand the journal, The People's Friend, that her character would read, a sort of quasi-religious journal, but full of actually romantic stories, Ciarán very kindly agreed to read one of these stories. It's just a page long from the journal in rehearsal for everybody, but especially for Judi, so that Judi was actively doing a bit of research, understanding what was in that journal was so important to that character. But she got to hear Ciarán talk in the way that he, presented the story. It's beautifully read, and that was a bonding moment as well. So we tried gently to just do things where there was immediately a shared experience. Judi herself, who has to deal with being the great and the good that she is, Judi Dench is very good at sort of setting people at their ease. So she came in with a mask with a sort of a lion's face on it, so it looked like she was roaring as she came into the thing. So immediately that made young Jude Hill laugh. Ciarán suddenly thought, what the bloody hell have I got myself into here? And generally, it was a great icebreaker. So there were a lot of instincts at work about how can we, briefly assemble a bit of shared experience that now has us expressing who we are and what we are, and venturing opinions. And I think people were very grateful for stories shared about Ciarán and the family holidays and what his dad was doing, Jamie Dornan growing up in the Troubles, Judi Dench's own family returning to Dublin for the first time since they had left, young Jude telling us about what it's like, these days playing football for his school and everything. And we very quickly assembled shared experience that just created trust. And then we had the sort of COVID itself bubbled you up into an enforced intimacy that had some positive side effects for this project.
Yeah, it was the focus of what we were there. The imperative was the work, because there was nothing nothing redundant around the sides. You needed just to focus and keep safe what it was. So, but those moments that we all had together seemed very full and open and complete and funny and warm and a bit mad, and yet at the same time everything was just rolling on in the art of storytelling that Ken wanted to make.
Mm-hmm. Right. Did you and Judy work specifically on that relationship? I mean, basically you feel a lifetime in every line and every glance between the two of you.
Oh, that's great to hear. No, we didn't work at it. Some things happen by osmosis, but I do believe, and Ken will know for sure, that when you have the fortune to be around Judi Dench, magical things happen. And because she is such a great human being, but it's also just so gifted, so quick, so witty, so warm, so challenging, so rebellious, so alive, so vibrant. She's just on fire. And what's amazing is when you think she has some macular degeneration, but in no way does that hamper her heart, her soul, her connections with people. And I have to say, when I saw her in her costume for the first time, she came in and, because Judy's quite glamorous, as she would be, gently glamorous. And she came in and she had these glasses and this wig on, and she was just like my old Auntie Molly. I just went back to my childhood and went, oh God, there's my Auntie Molly. And meanwhile, I was slowly morphing into a mixture of my father and my mother's father. These things that happen sometimes, which is often a lot to do with how you're presented by the costume designer, who's actually found wonderful fabrics and the truth of what they wear, these people. And suddenly you realize, yes, I do remember they did wear that. It's not invented at all. And but with Judy, it was fantastic because basically she's so quick and she's so fast, and that the joy, I think, of the relationship that Ken had written, not in any heavy-handed way, but you do see these people have been together for over 50 years, through thick and thin, and I bet you there were times that were really hard, and it could have been because of Pop's behavior as a young man, being a bit of a fly-by-night, doing ducking and diving and betting on the horses or scraping a living. There's a scene where she says, oh yeah, he said many jobs all right, like he can't hold down a job. She points that out, just like with one line down the history of a man told in one line that Ken just throws in. But then when you have he writes that scene between the two of them when they're just framed in the window, the two of them, and we don't know when we talk about, I think Pop's line is, when you have gray hair, people think your heart never skipped. The beauty of that, the poeticism of it, and yet it's very real. It's very true. And that was kind of littered all the way through the script and in our scenes, using the language. And in the end, I thought these were two people at the stage. Of course, there was love involved, but she was suffering him and he was still madly in love with her. That's how we ended up in the end, I think.
Right. Yeah. So, Ken, when you're casting this, I mean, obviously you can't, do much better than Judi Dench and Ciarán Hinds to start with. But how do you find the kid who belongs in that company?
Well, not only belongs in the company, but who will, in some kind of ways, lead the company. I mean, he has the sort of burden of carrying the way our audience sees the story through his eyes. So obviously we can help him enormously in terms of where we put the camera, but still we're looking for his face and his reactions to be a way of developing the emotional temperature and the tension inside the family. And so the greatest thing that we were looking for was the capacity to listen with presence from the young man who would play this part. And, it's natural enough for young actors to be a bit thrown. They want to please. We all do. I've auditioned a million times trying to give them what they want, very visibly, too much of it, and not getting the part. And Jude Hill proclaimed himself as a very interesting, intelligent, funny boy. and who in the final stages, after 300 competitive videos were sent in and many rounds of Zooming, suddenly it's a wet Saturday morning in Belfast, and I'm there in the room with him and Lewis McCaskey, who eventually played his brother Will. And we started to improvise a bit. So you needed to understand, well, was he thrown by that? Was that fun for him? Was that intimidating? It was fun. He was smart. And you could see that if you were photographing that face, you would indeed have the potential to feel that all of this was happening in the here and now. And that was key to our film. And could he maintain that and still receive some notes and not turn into an over-prepared actor? That was the act of faith that casting was going to be. But I knew that inside that leap of faith was the certainty that he was going to end up with a group of people from which he, as very much a sponge of a young mind, would probably be able to soak up much that was valuable. And indeed it was, as you saw him watch Ciarán, Judy, fascinated. I mean, he'd never been on a film set and like this before, and so it was. Our job really was to capture that, and one way to do it was hardly ever to rehearse, build up the human fabric of knowledge between people, but then try and capture it in the there and then. With Jude, trying to strike the balance between being prepared, knowing his lines, but not over prepared, and being able to listen, not just get ready to respond. And in that, I think he learned a great deal from people like Ciarán about being confidently being in the moment, knowing what you're going to say, but not preparing to say it.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, Ciarán, the two of you and Jude have some just lovely scenes. I mean, what was the experience like for you?
It was, I guess, with all the journeys we've been on through our work, it was, I can say, in all honesty, one of the most beautiful times I've had working. I think it was the purity of it, the purity of him and his innocence and his openness and his devilment. And he's a bit of a scamp as well as being his great fun, and he's open. And so we played with each other. We actually connected in between scenes. We just connected, and he was so much fun, and he didn't seem to mind me either, so that was good. And I remember Ken telling me he did Irish dancing as a kid. It was something he did, and Ken knowing that then he would have a discipline, because to learn the steps you have to repeat them till they're in your body. And all the time we were there, he was so he wasn't bored for a second, and he wasn't overexcited either. He was just present, really present, and lightly present, not heavily. So which actually reflects to your own spirit, that you as a more experienced person, but actually the aid that he was giving me in a way, what was emanating from him, put me into a different place as well. And I think that's what Ken was alluding to when we to get into that place where you can truly connect with each other.
Yeah, well, you're talking about him being a scamp, and it feels like this is a film where the tone is could be tricky. I mean, you're dealing with a dark time in this city, a dark time for this family. There's tragic things that happen, and yet there's a real sense of fun and joy. Ken, for you, how do you find the tone where you can go from a funeral to Jamie Dornan singing "Everlasting Love" and dancing with Katrina Balfe?
Well, I think that the depth and the darkness of the one necessitates the other, and that my experience was just that the Irish and death is something that is felt often I saw it many times, keening, women leaning and roaring and just really wailing some of the heartbreak out. And when enough of that has happened, then the opposite is required: dancing and wildness and release and laughter and a sort of a knowledge that we're all hurtling towards the grave, so we should grab what there is along the way. There's a line I was reminded of it at the end of Love's Labour's Lost, William Shakespeare's play. The character of Barone is forced as a punishment to visit people in hospital and cheer them up with humor. And his character responds by saying, to move wild laughter in the throat of death, it cannot be, it is impossible. Well, in Belfast, it had to be possible. We had to move wild laughter in the throat of death, because otherwise it was going to be an entirely sort of bleak scenario. So coping mechanisms of humor, dance, drink sometimes, but ad hoc parties, playing any instrument in any way, shape or form. Yeah, a release into that oral tradition of storytelling and fun had, sometimes excessively, but you were dealing with an excess of the dark side. And so the film was always looking to roar back to that which the boy wanted. He did not want all of this loss to have to be processed. He wanted things to be what they were. The film is partly the story of understanding that they cannot be. Life is a constant process of change. You'd love to be able to manage it and make the change smooth, acceptable, always joyful. But human development doesn't go in some smooth upward curve. It usually hits something like a death or a birth or a marriage or some violent life event that suddenly deepens our sense of human understanding. If you're 9-year-old, you don't really want to sign up for that, but life has other plans for you. And so while life is trying to make you serious, you are trying to make life light.
Right. I mean, you mentioned before that the movie sort of came out of the early lockdown, came out of COVID in certain ways, but it also strikes me that a movie about extremism and division is not far from today's headlines as well.
Yeah, I think that Ciarán used the word tribe earlier. I think that's accurate about what we experienced. And tribalism is something we're seeing in the world today. Intolerance, the current situation right now, as complex as it is, could also be reduced to the simple removal of communication and dialogue. One of the imperfect miracles of our lifetime has been that from the darkness of the Troubles, a 30-year period, comes lurching into being an imperfect but working peace that for the last 25 years has transformed the city of Belfast into some of the images that open this film. Governmentally and politically, crisis has lurched one to the other in the 25 years since, and dialogue has not been easy, and peace and reconciliation has been enormously difficult. But that desire to communicate on the part of so many people has been critical. When it's removed, then what happens is what we're seeing right now. Innocent people die, and that's not good enough.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, Ciarán, are there ways in which you feel like, by going back and playing, Ken's grandfather, your grandfather, your father, you're speaking to today?
Yeah, I know, like Ken does, because he's very involved still with communities back there, that there are an awful lot of people still working. It's not, and then suddenly peace broke out. It's not like that. It was worked for. The United States did an awful lot to help broker it at the time. Senator George Mitchell was there, coming backwards and forwards all the time over a couple of years. Very important. And John DeChastelin from Canada was involved. They gave time, like people outside what you think is a small culture, but there's a fractious culture, to come out and help, to come from the outside, to look and see what can we do. And then with all these connections of people, they had to work to bring people to the table, because these extreme divisive actions that have been taken, and they kept working. And there was a fantastic group called the Women's Coalition, And there was a time when they were actually the go-between between both of the more extreme parties or factions on the Loyalist and Republican side. Because they wouldn't talk to each other, and this party was formed called the Women's Coalition, and they would talk to them, and they were kind of helping to broker some kind of connection as well. So it was about the connection, the communication, and that's still going on, thank God, and has to be continued, because things like this, it doesn't take much to strike a match and set it on fire again. But I think there's a generation now who have no interest in that at all, and not to be carrying the weight of other people's bitterness on their shoulders. That it's like, Chekhov was saying, if we can't even get it right, what about for our children or our children's children? Can we go think further than just our own petty factionalism and think about what we could do to move things forward? Pipe dream. But hey, we have to keep working at it.
Yes. Well, I think on that note, we should probably wrap up. But for the audience out there, thank you for joining us today. And you can be the first to know about upcoming screenings, and you can get access to exclusive content by becoming a Wrap Pro member. We now have a free trial. You can take advantage of that. Otherwise, for screening information, including videos of past screenings you might have missed, you can visit TheWrap.com and click on the events tab. Ken, Ciarán, thank you very much for just a beautiful, extraordinary film and for a great conversation.
Thanks very much, Steve. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Steve.